Today, we are going to be taking a deep dive into a pretty unique concept. It's this whole idea of experiencing faith as something delicious,
Yeah.
something you can actually taste and see.
Oh, I like that. Taste and see.
Yeah, and to kind of unpack this idea, we've got a few different sources we're going to be looking at today.
Okay.
We've got this devotional from the Apostolic Faith Church. It's called Great Tasting.
Great tasting.
All right. Which, I mean, right off the bat, that title just grabbed my attention.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, of course, we'll be looking at the verse that inspired it.
Okay.
Psalm 34.8.
Love that one.
Yeah, and to add a little modern twist, we've also got some lyrics from the contemporary Christian song Sweeter by Lakewood Church.
Okay, so we've got like a nice blend here of personal reflection, ancient scripture, modern worship music. I'm excited.
Yeah. So let's jump right in. This devotional, Great Tasting. It starts with a story about the author's friend who is absolutely crazy about Barry Cobbler. Like, can't get enough of it.
Okay. Barry Cobbler faith.
Huh?
How do those two things go together?
Well, that's what I thought too.
Yeah.
But the author talks about how her friend, every time she has this cobbler, she just can't stop raving about how good it is. Like every bite is just pure bliss.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, who doesn't love a good Barry Cobbler?
Right. But the author uses this as an analogy, right?
Okay.
It's not just about knowing that God is good.
Mm-hmm.
It's about experiencing that goodness
Okay.
in a way that makes you want to shout it from the rooftops, Just like the friend with her cobbler.
Okay, so it's like moving beyond just believing in God to actually having like a real tangible experience of his goodness.
Exactly. But how do we actually do that? How do we move from like the theory to the experience? That's where Psalm 34.8 comes in. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good.
I've always loved that verse.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, the word choice there. It doesn't say hear or learn about God's goodness. It says taste and see, It's engaging the senses in a way that feels really immediate and personal.
Yeah, it's like you have to experience it for yourself.
Right, exactly.
It's like trying to describe a delicious meal to someone who's never tasted it. Words just don't do it justice.
It's like the difference between reading about a beautiful sunset and actually
Yeah.
standing there watching those colors paint the sky,
Yeah.
you know.
So in that sense, this verse is like an invitation, right? It's an
Uh-huh.
invitation to actually experience faith, to taste God's goodness for ourselves
Yeah.
and see how it impacts us,
Yeah.
how it changes us.
Okay, but what does it actually mean to taste God's goodness? Like, is it just a metaphor, or is there something more to it?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, it's not like we can physically bite into God's goodness like a piece of cobbler.
Well, not literally, no. But I think there's definitely something to be said for this whole idea of experiential faith,
Mm-hmm.
right? A faith that goes beyond just intellectual understanding and engages, our hearts, our senses, our whole being.
So you're saying that there are ways to actually experience God's goodness in a way that feels real. Like what kind of experiences are we talking about here?
That's where it gets really interesting, and it's something we'll definitely be exploring in more detail. But think about, those moments when you feel a sense of awe and wonder, like looking at a starry night sky or witnessing an act of incredible kindness. Or maybe it's the feeling of peace and joy that washes over you during prayer or meditation.
Oh, I see what you mean. Those moments, they do feel special, almost like a glimpse into something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And those are just a few examples. There are so many paths to experiencing God's goodness. And what resonates with one person might not be the same for another.
Right.
But I think the key is to just be open to those experiences, to cultivate a sense of awareness and intentionality in our spiritual lives.
So it's about being present, paying attention to those moments when we feel a sense of connection, of something greater than ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. It's about approaching faith with a sense of curiosity and wonder, like a child discovering the world for the first time.
Now, speaking of that childlike wonder, the devotional also quotes this line from a hymn. It says, "He's sweeter than honey from out of the comb." And it's such a vivid image,
Yeah.
It reminds me of how Psalm 19.10 also describes God's word as being sweeter than honey.
It's like this whole idea of using sensory language to describe spiritual experiences. It's not just limited to ancient texts,
Right.
Even in contemporary Christian music, you see artists using this kind of language to connect with their listeners on a deeper level.
And that brings us to the Lakewood Church song Sweeter, which we'll dive into after a quick
Yeah.
look at these lyrics. This song really captures that feeling of experiencing God's presence as something undeniably delicious.
All right, can't wait to hear it.
All right, so let's take a listen to that excerpt from Sweeter by Lakewood Church.
Okay.
All right. So what do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting how even though these lyrics, like, the ones we're focusing on are a little bit fragmented, like all over town, I wonder where we were too hot, we're here too went over, it still manages to convey that sense of, excitement and joyful pursuit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that. It's definitely not your, typical hymn lyrics.
Right.
But I can feel the energy in the music, that sense of like overflowing joy, almost like it's impossible to contain.
It's like they've stumbled upon something incredible.
Yeah.
Something life-changing, and they just can't help but share it with the world. It's contagious.
And it makes me think back to that Barry Cobbler analogy.
Right, totally.
It's that same like irrepressible delight, that urge to tell everyone, you've got to taste this.
Exactly. It brings us back to this whole idea of experiential faith, right?
Okay.
It's not just about knowing about God. It's about experiencing his goodness, like in a tangible, life-altering way.
So, okay, we've talked about the theory. We've talked about the analogy. We even heard a modern take on it through music.
Yeah.
But what does this all mean for us, for someone listening right now? Like, how do we actually cultivate this tasting faith in our own lives?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And there's no easy answer. It's not like, following a recipe, you just mix the ingredients and voila, you've got instant faith. It doesn't work that way.
So it's not about following a formula or a set of rules.
Not exactly. It's more about cultivating an openness, a receptivity to God's presence in our lives. It's about recognizing those moments where we catch a glimpse of his goodness.
Yeah.
Even in the midst of, ordinary everyday experiences.
So like, where do we even begin? What are some like practical steps we can take to make this tasting and seeing a reality in our own lives?
Well, there are many paths, and what works for one person might not resonate with another.
Yeah.
But, here are a few practices that I think might be helpful. Think about mindful prayer.
Mindful prayer. I've heard of mindful meditation, but mindful prayer, what does that even look like?
Yeah. Where you're not just reciting like memorized words, but you're truly opening your heart to God's presence.
Yeah.
You're being fully present in that moment, paying attention to your breath, your body, your surroundings. And as you do that, you invite God into that space, allowing yourself to connect with him on a much deeper level.
So it's about quieting that noise, right? Both internal and external, so you can really tune in to that still small voice within.
Exactly, yeah. Another practice that I think can be incredibly powerful is engaging in acts of service.
Oh, yeah.
When we extend God's love to others, we often experience that same love flowing back to us in these unexpected ways.
Yeah. I've always found that to be true. There's something so fulfilling about helping others, about making a positive difference in the world. It's like this little spark of joy ignites within you.
And that spark, that joy, I think it's often a sign that we're tapping into something much larger than ourselves.
Yeah.
We're experiencing God's love in action, both in the giving and the receiving.
So acts of service can actually be a way of tasting God's goodness.
Total.
Both for ourselves and for those we serve.
Absolutely. And then there's the simple yet profound act of connecting with nature.
Oh, yeah.
Taking a walk in the woods, gazing at the stars, feeling the warmth of the sun on your skin. These experiences can evoke such a sense of awe and wonder that connects us to the Creator in a very tangible way.
You're reminding me of something I read recently about how nature can be a kind of a thin place.
Oh, yeah.
Where the veil between the physical and the spiritual feels especially thin.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we're stepping into the sacred space where we can more easily sense God's presence, his beauty, his majesty. And in those moments, it's hard not to feel a deep sense of gratitude for the gift of creation.
So it sounds like cultivating this tasting faith isn't about like grand gestures, or elaborate rituals. It's about incorporating these simple practices into our daily lives.
Right.
Mindful prayer, acts of service, connecting with nature. And just paying attention to those moments where we catch a glimpse of God's goodness.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about being present, being aware, and being open to experiencing God in new and unexpected ways.
Yeah.
It's about noticing the little things, those seemingly insignificant moments that can actually be filled with profound meaning.
So it's not just about having like one big aha moment where everything suddenly makes sense. It's about those smaller, quieter moments
Yeah.
where we feel a connection, a sense of peace, a spark of joy. Precisely. And the more we pay attention to those moments, the more we cultivate an attitude of gratitude, the richer and more fulfilling our faith journey becomes. We begin to see God's hand at work in all areas of our lives, even in the midst of challenges and difficulties.
Okay, this is all starting to make a lot more sense now. But you know what? There's still a part of me that wonders, what about those times when life feels anything but good?
Hmm.
When we're going through difficult seasons, experiencing loss or facing pain. How do we taste and see God's goodness then?
That's a really important question, and it's something we definitely need to address. Because let's be honest, life isn't always sunshine and roses. We all face difficult times when it's hard to see the good, let alone taste it. But even in those dark moments, there are still ways to experience God's presence and find comfort in his love.
So how do we do that? How do we taste and see when life just feels, I don't know, bitter? Well, one way is to remember that God is always with us,
Yeah.
even in the midst of our pain. He doesn't abandon us in our suffering. He walks with us through it, offering comfort, strength, and hope.
That's a beautiful thought. But I have to admit, it's not always easy to feel God's presence, when you're hurting.
You're absolutely right. It takes a conscious effort to shift our focus from the pain to the presence of God. It might mean, leaning on our faith community, seeking support from loved ones, or simply pouring out our hearts to God in prayer, even if it's just raw emotion and anger.
So it's about clinging to that belief that God is still there,
Yeah,
even when we can't see him or feel him clearly.
exactly. And sometimes it's in those moments of deepest despair that we experience God's grace most powerfully. We might feel his comfort in a kind word from a stranger, his strength and in a sudden surge of resilience, or his hope in a tiny glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. So even in the midst of darkness, there are still these little tastes of God's goodness,
Yeah.
these little reminders that he hasn't forgotten us.
Absolutely. And as we learn to recognize those tastes, those moments of grace, we begin to develop a deeper, more resilient faith, a faith that can weather the storms of life and emerge even stronger.
That's such an encouraging thought. It
Yeah.
it means that even when life throws us curveballs, even when we can't taste and see in the same way we might during happy times, God is still present. He's still working in and through our circumstances.
Exactly. And that brings us back to this whole idea of experiential faith, right? It's not a one size fits all kind of thing. It's a journey, a process of ongoing discovery and deepening relationship with God.
And that journey can take us through valleys as well as mountaintops, through seasons of joy and the seasons of sorrow.
Exactly. Yeah. And through it all, we can choose to look for those tastes of God's goodness, those moments of grace that remind us that we're not alone, that we're
Right.
loved, and that even in the midst of darkness, there is always hope.
It's almost like we need to trust that, even when we can't see the full picture, even when we can't taste the sweetness, God's still there,
Right.
working behind the scenes,
Yeah.
weaving together this tapestry of goodness that maybe we won't fully appreciate until later.
Yeah, it reminds me of that saying, faith is seeing light with your heart when all your eyes see is darkness.
Oh, I love that. It really speaks to that deep inner knowing that sustains us even when our external circumstances are challenging.
And that kind of knowing, that trust in God's goodness, that can be incredibly empowering, gives us the strength to face adversity, the courage to hope, and the resilience to keep moving forward, even when we don't understand what's happening.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Sure we have.
Exploring this idea of tasting and seeing faith from all these different angles, the personal story, the biblical verse, the modern worship song, and even those times when life throws us those curveballs.
Right. We've talked about the importance of experiential faith,
Yeah.
of moving beyond intellectual assent to actually engaging our senses, our hearts, our whole beings in the pursuit of God's goodness.
We've explored different practices that can help us cultivate this tasting faith in our own lives. Mindful prayer, acts
Mm.
of service, connecting with nature.
And we've acknowledged that this journey of faith, it isn't always easy, that it will take us through valleys as well as mountaintops,
Right.
through seasons of joy and seasons of sorrow, but that even in the midst of darkness, there are still glimpses of God's grace to be found.
So if I could sum up what we've learned today,
Yeah.
it's that faith isn't just about believing in God, it's about experiencing God. It's about actively seeking out those moments where we can taste and see his goodness, his love, his presence in our lives.
And recognizing that those experiences might look different for each of us, right? There's no one-size-fits-all approach to tasting God's goodness.
Yeah.
It's a deeply personal and unique journey for each individual.
And that brings us back to you, dear listener. We've been on this incredible journey together, exploring this rich and multifaceted idea of experiencing faith as something we can actually taste and see. But now it's your turn. What does goodness taste like to you?
Where do you find those glimpses of God's grace, those moments of joy, peace, love, or awe that nourish your soul and deepen your faith?
And how can you be more intentional about savoring those experiences, about making them a regular part of your life?
These are questions worth pondering, questions that can lead to a richer, more fulfilling, and more deeply rooted faith journey.
We hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought, some new ideas to chew on, and maybe even inspired you to go out and discover your own unique flavor of faith.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep tasting, and keep seeking those glimpses of God's goodness that make life so incredibly delicious.